When the lights go out and stay out, your worst enemy isn't the darkness itself. It's the panic that rises in your chest, the fear that clouds your judgment, and the psychological collapse that happens faster than you'd ever imagine. Most people preparing for a blackout obsess over gear, food stockpiles, and backup generators, but they completely ignore the most critical component of survival, their own mind. If you're serious about making it through a prolonged blackout scenario, you need to understand how fear works, how it will betray you, and what you can do to prevent your psychology from becoming your death sentence. Subscribe now, because what you're about to learn could mean the difference between rational survival and psychological breakdown when the grid fails. The first thing you need to understand is that fear is a physiological response, not just an emotion. When the power goes out and doesn't come back on, your body immediately begins producing cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logical thinking and planning, starts shutting down. This isn't weakness. This is evolution. Your ancestors survived because their bodies could shift into fight or flight mode when facing predators. The problem is that in a modern blackout scenario, this ancient survival mechanism works against you. You don't need to run from a lion. You need to think clearly, make rational decisions, and maintain emotional stability for days or weeks. But your body doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and total grid failure. It responds the same way. Studies from disaster psychology have shown that during the first 72 hours of any major crisis, approximately 70% of people experience what researchers call behavioral inaction syndrome. They freeze. They wait for someone to tell them what to do. They assume help is coming. This paralysis isn't laziness or stupidity. It's a documented psychological phenomenon where the brain becomes so overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster that it simply stops processing information effectively. People will sit in their darkened homes watching their phone batteries drain, waiting for an authority figure to restore normalcy. By the time they realize no one is coming, they've already wasted their most valuable resource: time. If you're reading this, you cannot afford to be part of that 70%. The second psychological trap that will destroy you during a blackout is normalcy bias. This is the tendency to believe that because something has never happened before, it won't happen now. You've experienced temporary power outages. They lasted a few hours, maybe a day. Crews showed up, fixed the problem, and life continued. Your brain uses those past experiences to predict the future, and it tells you that this blackout will be the same. This is why people don't evacuate during hurricanes until it's too late. This is why they don't take warnings seriously. Normalcy bias makes you underestimate threats and overestimate your safety. During the 2003 Northeast blackout, which affected 50 million people, many individuals didn't even bother to fill their bathtubs with water or secure additional food because they assumed power would return within hours. Some people continued going to work, expecting buildings to function normally. Normalcy bias kills because it prevents you from taking immediate, decisive action when action matters most. Let's talk about panic contagion, because this is where individual psychology becomes group psychology and where things get genuinely dangerous. Humans are social creatures, and we unconsciously mirror the emotional states of those around us. If your family members start panicking, your nervous system will pick up on those cues, even if you're trying to stay calm. If your neighbors begin acting irrationally, looting stores, or fighting over resources, that fear spreads like a virus. During the 1977 New York City blackout, looting began within hours, not because everyone suddenly became criminals, but because panic and uncertainty created a psychological cascade where normal social rules seem suspended. One person breaking a window gives permission to others. One family fleeing their home triggers the family next door to consider doing the same. This is panic contagion, and it's one of the most dangerous psychological forces during any disaster. You must recognize it and consciously resist it. The isolation factor is something preppers rarely discuss, but absolutely must understand. When a blackout extends beyond a few days, you lose all normal forms of communication. No internet, no phones, no news. You become isolated not just physically, but informationally and emotionally. Human beings need social connection for psychological stability. Studies on solitary confinement show that isolation causes severe mental deterioration within days. During a prolonged blackout, you're not in solitary confinement, but the psychological effects are similar. You don't know what's happening beyond your immediate neighborhood. You don't know if help is coming. You don't know how bad things are or how long this will last. That uncertainty breeds anxiety, which breeds paranoia, which breeds poor decision-making. People in this state begin making desperate choices, leaving safe locations to seek information, trusting dangerous strangers, or abandoning perfectly viable survival plans because they convince themselves there must be something better elsewhere. Fear also destroys your ability to assess risk accurately. When your amygdala is firing and your cortisol levels are spiking, you start seeing threats everywhere. That neighbor walking past your house isn't just a neighbor anymore. Your frightened brain interprets them as a potential looter. That noise outside isn't wind, it's someone trying to break in. This hypervigilance might seem like an advantage, but it's exhausting and counterproductive. You burn through mental and physical energy responding to false threats. You make aggressive defensive decisions that alienate potential allies. You create conflict where none existed. During the 2021 Texas winter blackout, there were documented cases of neighbors threatening each other over perceived resource hoarding, even though most people were simply trying to survive. Fear makes you see enemies instead of community. Sleep deprivation compounds every single psychological problem during a blackout. Without electricity, your normal sleep patterns are disrupted. You're staying awake later because darkness falls and there's nothing to do. You're waking up constantly because you're anxious. You're not getting deep restorative sleep because your nervous system is on high alert. After just 48 hours of poor sleep, your cognitive function drops to levels equivalent to being legally drunk. Your memory fails, your judgment deteriorates, your emotional regulation collapses, you become irritable, impulsive, and prone to mistakes. Military research has shown that sleep-deprived soldiers make catastrophically bad decisions in combat situations. A sleep-deprived civilian during a blackout faces the same cognitive impairment, except they don't have training or support systems to compensate. One of the most overlooked psychological dangers is decision fatigue. Every single choice during a blackout requires mental energy. Should we use the generator now or save fuel? Should we eat canned food or save it for later? Should we stay inside or check on the neighbors? Should we boil this water or risk drinking it? In normal life, most of your decisions are automated. You don't think about whether to flip a light switch or turn on the faucet. But in a blackout, every basic function requires a conscious decision, and your brain has a limited capacity for decision-making each day. As that capacity depletes, you start making progressively worse choices. You choose the convenient option instead of the safe option. You avoid making decisions altogether and default to inaction. You become paralyzed by even simple choices because your mental reserves are exhausted. Children amplify every psychological challenge. If you have kids, their fear becomes your fear multiplied. They don't understand what's happening. They're scared of the dark. They don't comprehend why they can't watch television or use their tablets. They ask questions you can't answer. When will the power come back? Why can't we go to school? Why are people acting strange? Your job becomes managing not just your own psychology but theirs as well, and that requires immense emotional energy. Research from child psychology shows that children take their emotional cues from their parents. If you're visibly terrified, they absorb that terror. If you're calm and confident, they feel safer. You must perform psychological stability even when you don't feel it, which is an exhausting form of emotional labor that most parents aren't prepared for. The scarcity mindset is another psychological trap that emerges quickly during blackouts. Once you realize that stores aren't opening, that supply chains are broken, and that resources are finite, your brain shifts into hoarding mode. You start viewing everything as scarce and irreplaceable. You hoard food you should share. You refuse to help neighbors because you're convinced you'll need every resource for yourself. This mindset is evolutionarily logical, but practically dangerous. Humans survive disasters better in cooperative groups than as isolated individuals. The families and communities that thrived during historical blackouts and disasters were those that pooled resources, shared skills, and maintained social bonds. The ones that descended into selfish hoarding and paranoia suffered higher mortality rates and psychological trauma. Scarcity mindset feels protective but actually increases your vulnerability. Survivor's guilt is something you need to prepare for emotionally, especially if you're well prepared and others around you aren't. If you have food, water, and security while your neighbors are struggling, you will feel psychological distress. You'll question whether you should share. You'll feel guilty about being prepared. You'll wonder if you're selfish for prioritizing your family's survival. This guilt can lead to dangerous decisions, giving away resources you actually need, or conversely, becoming so hardened by guilt that you completely shut off empathy and create long-term psychological damage. Understanding this in advance helps. Survivor's guilt is a normal human response. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But you must make rational decisions about resource allocation, not emotional ones driven by guilt or shame. The concept of psychological armor is what serious preppers need to develop before the crisis hits. This isn't about becoming emotionless or detached. It's about training your mind the same way you'd train your body. You need to practice stress inoculation, deliberately expose yourself to controlled discomfort, turn off your power for a weekend, practice making decisions under pressure. Rehearse scenarios mentally so your brain has frameworks to reference when real crisis hits. Navy SEALs and other elite units use a technique called tactical breathing to control fear responses. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system and counteracts the panic response. Simple, proven, effective. Learn it now. Practice it until it becomes automatic. You also need to establish psychological routines before the blackout happens. Routines provide structure and predictability, which are powerful tools against chaos and fear. If you know that every morning you'll conduct a security check, inventory supplies, and plan the day, your brain has something concrete to focus on instead of spiraling into anxiety. Routines reduce decision fatigue. They provide a sense of control in an uncontrollable situation. They give you purpose and direction. Look at how astronauts and Antarctic researchers maintain psychological health during isolation. They follow strict daily routines. They schedule tasks, meals, exercise, and rest. They create structure because structure prevents mental deterioration. Let's address the elephant in the room: mental health medications. If you or family members rely on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, or other psychiatric drugs, a prolonged blackout creates a serious medical crisis. These medications often require refrigeration. They have limited shelf lives. If you run out during a blackout, you risk severe withdrawal symptoms, psychological destabilization, or even medical emergencies. This isn't something to ignore or hope won't happen. You need to consult with healthcare providers now about obtaining emergency supplies, understanding withdrawal protocols, and having backup plans. The psychological impact of losing access to necessary medications during an already stressful situation can be catastrophic. One of the most dangerous psychological phenomena during extended blackouts is what disaster psychologists call temporal distortion. When your normal routines collapse, when days blur together without the structure of work, school, or regular schedules, your sense of time becomes severely distorted. Hours feel like days. Days feel like weeks. This distortion increases anxiety because you lose the ability to gauge how long you've been in crisis and how much longer you can endure. Keeping a written journal, marking days on a calendar, and maintaining strict timekeeping habits help combat this. It sounds trivial, but knowing what day it is and how many days have passed provides crucial psychological anchoring. The truth about fear is that it will betray you in subtle ways you won't recognize in the moment. It will convince you that threats are everywhere. It will make you distrust people you should trust. It will paralyze you when you need to move and make you act impulsively when you should wait. It will destroy your sleep, your judgment, and your relationships. It will turn you into someone you don't recognize. But fear is also just chemistry and electrical signals. It's not truth. It's not prophecy. It's your body trying to protect you using systems designed for a world that no longer exists. Your job is to acknowledge the fear, understand it, and then override it with rational thought and prepared action. Some people reading this are thinking they'll be fine because they're naturally calm or because they've handled stress before. That's dangerous thinking. Chronic disaster stress is different from acute everyday stress. It's cumulative, relentless, and overwhelming. The person who handles work deadlines calmly might completely fall apart when their child is crying from hunger and there's no food available. The person who thinks they're tough because they've faced hardship might discover they have no coping mechanisms for sustained uncertainty. Confidence is valuable, but overconfidence is deadly. Respect the psychological challenge of prolonged blackouts. Prepare for it as seriously as you prepare for physical challenges. Here's what you need to do right now, today, before any blackout happens. First, develop a psychological first aid plan for your household. Identify who is most vulnerable to panic: children, elderly, those with mental health conditions, and create specific support strategies for them. Second, establish communication protocols. Decide how your family will share information, make decisions, and resolve conflicts when stress is high. Third, practice stress management techniques regularly so they become reflexive, not theoretical. Fourth, build community connections now, because social support is the single most powerful protective factor against psychological breakdown during disasters. Fifth, create realistic expectations. Understand that you will be afraid, that you will struggle, and that this is normal. Accepting this in advance reduces the shock when it happens. You also need to understand the recovery phase psychology. If and when the blackout ends and power is restored, you don't just return to normal immediately. You'll experience post-traumatic stress. You'll have nightmares. You'll be hypervigilant. You'll have intrusive thoughts about what happened and what could have happened. This is normal. It's your brain processing trauma. Don't ignore it or pretend you're fine. Talk about it. Seek support if needed. Many people who survive disasters develop long-term psychological issues, not because of what happened during the crisis, but because they didn't address the psychological aftermath properly. The psychological skills you develop for blackout survival have value beyond disaster scenarios. Learning to manage fear, maintain emotional regulation under stress, and make rational decisions in uncertainty makes you more resilient in all aspects of life. These aren't just survival skills, they're life skills. The person who can control their fear response during a blackout is the same person who can handle job loss, medical emergencies, relationship crises, and all the other challenges life throws at us. You're not just preparing for disaster. You're becoming a more capable, stable, resilient human being. And if you want to go deeper, you'll find in the pinned comment some guides and documents that can take your preparedness to the next level. Check them out when you're ready. But don't just read. Don't just consume information. Act, practice, prepare. Because when the lights go out and fear starts whispering lies in your ear, you'll need more than knowledge. You'll need trained responses, established routines, and the psychological strength to push through when everything in your body is screaming at you to give up. That strength doesn't appear magically during crisis. You build it now, today, through deliberate preparation and honest self-assessment. The blackout is coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this year, but the question isn't if, it's when. And when it arrives, your mind will either be your greatest asset or your most dangerous liability. Choose now which one it will be. If this information helped you understand what most people never consider until it's too late, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because survival isn't about gear. It's about the strength between your ears, and that's exactly what we teach here.